are, so your expressions.
Good evening, muy buenas noches. Lashana Tova, Happy New Year to all our Jewish sisters and brothers. Welcome to the West Hartford Public School Board of Education meeting for Tuesday, October 4. Can you please call the roll?
Here.
Ms. Exum?
Here.
Dr. Greenberg?
Here.
Dr. Overmeyer Velasquez?
Here.
Mr. Paul Yuk?
Here.
Mr. Sarzan? Here. Mr. Zadanowicz?
Here.
Student Representative Taylor Steer? And Student Representative Sarah Berman.
Here.
I understand that Taylor's under the weather. Sarah, would you please lead us in the pledge?
I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We hope Taylor gets well soon, and we understand Mr. Moore is a little under the weather, so for those of you watching at home, he will be unusually quiet tonight. Good for viewers. We have no revision to the agenda order, and we have no student participation as of yet. We will be having student participation coming up as the school gets settled, and we get to look forward to learning directly from students. Public communications, would anyone like to address the board tonight? I didn't see anyone signed up. Not yet. Very well, moving on. No unfinished business, new business. Right on to Mr. Moore, staff communications and reports.
Good evening. A couple of calendar discussions about, just a reminder to people that next week is the October break, as some have come to calling it, which is a unique entity that happened at this moment in time. I've had to tell some parents, don't get used to this because, but it is with Columbus Day and Yom Kippur falling Monday and Wednesday, that Tuesday becoming teacher in-service day, so that our buildings on Election Day will be completely empty other than administrators there. That will hopefully ease any crowding that occurs on Election Day. And it also is a good opportunity for people to visit colleges. I can tell you, just as feedback, 'cause I'm not sure how much you've received as a board, because the calendar is your decision. Over the past week, I've had numerous people come up to me and thank me that just realized it, that are going on college visits, and are using the time productively. So I think it was a well-received decision for this mini break that's coming up. In addition to calendar, October 6th, 5:30 to 7 p.m. at Charter Oak International Academy, the Community Open House, 5:30 to 7 p.m. So that is this week, and good opportunity for members of the community that this is your building, this new Charter Oak. If you haven't had a chance to come by, get a tour, get a little history about the building and what went into it and what the old building looked like, and a little bit of a history lesson at the beginning of it, it should be a great night. And Juan Melion's very excited to host, and we'll have some of the people that are involved in the construction all the way through. So this week, Charter Oak Community Open House. I also want to point out something that West Hartford's received recognition for in articles in Education Week and discussions at a national level. Jessica Blitzer, our Social Studies Department Supervisor for Conard and Sedgwick, was invited last week to be a part of a national group of university professors, religious scholars, and teachers embedded in the work of religious studies meeting in Washington, D.C. to develop an appendix on religious studies for the Common Core standards. 10-member group sponsored by the Religious Freedom Center of the Newseum had the goal of writing a draft of this appendix for review and approval by the National Council for the Social Studies. So this is just a tremendous statement of belief in Jessica, in the system, and what we do. And also, we want to be a leader in teaching things that really matter to kids, really matter to the world around us. One of the policies that I think as a board, I really appreciate in West Hartford is the controversial issues policy, which states that we won't back away from teaching things just because they're controversial. And it is a statement that I think is really important. And I think that we are a model for how we teach religion, for being an example of, from kindergarten forward, exposing children to the lessons of the world's religions. So, again, not to inculcate, but to educate. So that was good news for Jessica, and I'm happy she had that opportunity. And that is all that I have as far as updates go. So, questions about that?
No questions. And I understand you're going to be presenting our first report.
Yeah, rarely do I present, but the reason I am, the profile and performance report from the state of Connecticut, this is the new report that Paul Vycinas presented on in the spring, if you recall, different metrics that will measure a district and its effectiveness. Now, this replaces what used to be the school strategic profiles that were strategic school profiles that were published for every district in the 2000s. And then in 2012, the state basically stopped publishing. We still had to produce them, and as you can see, the report takes a lot to put together. There's narratives. Every school in the district also had to put together their own narrative. Each school has a report. All of these reports are available on our website, and there's links to them on the district website. But one of the things that that I want to caution about this report tonight, and the reason that it's not a centerpiece presentation, is this is the district profile and performance report from the 2014-15 school year that the state's just published. They also published the 13-14, but the law is specific to we have to present the most recent to the board. So as they publish them both at the same time, this is the 14-15 district profile and performance report. So without getting into specifics, as it's something that, as I said, is 2 years old already, and the report that Paul will be doing later tonight on the Smarter Balance will actually show growth, and the report that Paul did 2 weeks ago on the SAT actually gets into a lot of that data, and it's fresh data as opposed to this old data. A couple things that I think are interesting here to point out. On page 4, you get some special education numbers placed without of the district. If you look at the chart on the top right, students with disabilities placed outside of the district, I just want to clarify that private schools or other settings, that doesn't necessarily mean we place them outside of the district. That's also parents placing outside of the district. And if you look at page 6, college entrance and persistence, when the College Board talks about its theme of trying to engage more people in the college process, they use 3 themes: getting prepared, getting in, and getting through. And we've often had a question about, and we've also wondered, and it's really hard to track, how do our kids do? And with their partnership with the National Student Clearinghouse that the state of Connecticut's engaged in, now we actually get some good data for this class. And so when we look at graduates, we see that of those that entered college from West Hartford Public Schools, overall 93% persisted after their first year. So that's something people have asked about that I think that's a good number. Again, this is brand new, so I don't really have the comparative data other than what it says district and state. So we don't have DIRG data or that.
Is that 93% of those who
Of those that enrolled,
enrolled? So it actually, if you factor those who didn't, that
it's probably about 82, 83% when you
okay.
figure it
Yeah.
out. Yeah.
This is clarification. Thank you.
Nope, no problem. And then the next generation accountability results, those aren't really, I wouldn't consider those to be particularly valid because they're publishing things for 2 years ago that weren't the standards that we were working towards because that wasn't any goals that were listed at that point. But still interesting. We know about our achievement gap, as we explained last week with the SATs. We understand our gap is greater because even though our success rates with all groups are greater. That's something that certainly we're working on. And I think a lot of the questions that come up will probably come up with smarter balance discussion also, but I'm happy to answer any specifics about this report here.
I just have one question on that, the last chart you were referring to. What is arts access? What does that mean?
This is the arts access, and Paul went through this last year. It's a percentage of students that I think sophomore year, all 4 years, that can't be, is it? Are engaged in one art subject. So in a district where you have multiple choices for students, so many of our students might take technical education. So graphics wouldn't necessarily count as an art education course, whereas a smaller district, they wouldn't have that option as for as many electives, but art would be an elective, so those numbers could be inflated in smaller districts vis-a-vis our numbers.
Thank you.
I have the two questions you did predict and one that you didn't. But going in order of the charts. The cohort graduation for 4-year, there's the rate of graduation and then the target for graduation rates. And I just want to ask, I just don't know the answer. For students with disabilities, the target rate was 74.2% should graduate on time, I assume. Is that in fact a reasonable target? I mean, I just don't know what kinds of needs these kids have and whether or not that's a realistic target to shoot for.
I really appreciate that question because it's one of those things that we struggle with all goals we want to be realistic, but at the same point we never want to say, well, we'll take 3/4 of you. But what should that target be? So that you're talking about the top chart on page 6. But if you go back to page 4, and then the top chart on the left, students with disability by primary disability, what's the appropriate graduation rate for each of those? But even within those, there is no one child living with autism. All children living with autism come from different places. So to say that that should be 100%, 74%, that's the importance of the individualized education plans. That's the benefit in special education, to look at what is an appropriate measure for that child, what are appropriate benchmarks for that child. So I can't say that 74.2 is an appropriate or not an appropriate number. It's what the state's established.
Well, fair enough. And in a way that gets me, skipping ahead, to another question about college entrance and persistence. I've asked this before, so I'll just say it again for the record. The entrance question is all the students who entered college within a year of graduation. And I just want to say again, not every child is ready to go to college within a year of graduation. Some of them take gap years, some of them go abroad, some of them do other things. And so I just want to call attention to the fact that it is kind of a misleading statistic. I know that you didn't choose it. But like this other one, I just want to point to the fact, of course we want 100% in an ideal world, but it's not. Sometimes ideal is not 100%. And again, I'm not saying that you are saying that, but I just want to make a point for both the disabled kids with disabilities and the kids going to college that in fact we need to be realistic that every kid is different.
And I think that one of the ways that we completely as a system agree with you is we've started our gap year fair. And each year, I think it's been going 2 years now, and that's increased dramatically, showing opportunities to students that, okay, maybe you're not ready yet, but what are the options? And what does not ready even mean? And they may be perfectly ready academically, or they may be ready socially, but maybe they're not into it at that point, depending on the child. So knowing those options are out there is something, it's kind of counterintuitive if we just care about metrics to have that night, but really that's a metric that, well, again, we want to focus on the individual.
Absolutely. And again, I know that you know that. I just feel like making that a public kind of admission. And the third question that I have is about 11th and 12th graders meeting benchmark on at least one college readiness exam. I know that we're going to talk, and we always talk about the achievement gap, but I just want to point out that the Black or African American rate of meeting the benchmark is actually lower than the benchmark for those eligible for free or reduced price meals. So when we talk about the achievement gap, certainly some of it is class, socioeconomic based, but not all of it, because this is actually worse than kids who are on free and reduced lunch. So I'm just saying that I mean, again, you know this, but I just want to call attention to the viewing public that the enrollment, that the achievement gap is real.
And this is also one of those things that, in some ways, the misnomer being that it's a 3 or higher on the exam. Because another measurement is earning a C or better in an advanced placement course. And if you use that measurement, we're actually doing much better than that number. So that's what the state has settled on. This is something that, we want our students to be achieving higher and higher on SATs, on AP exams, and that's certainly something we're focused on. You're exactly right.
Tom, thanks. Can you clarify again the audience, the consumers of this, understanding that this is a template that we need to follow and for the Connecticut State Department of Education, but in addition to being publicly accessible and people can read it as they wish, does it have any teeth beyond this? I mean, there's one question. So what is done with this information at the level of the state? Second, is there a relationship between this format data and the information that colleges and universities get about the different schools, that is Hall and Conard, and the relationship there? And is there anyone else that is receiving this necessarily or automatically?
This report will go into the DPI, the District Performance Index, which will be a report that we'll get that will focus on growth in those metrics. As you recall, some of them are in here, but remember the PE portion, where was it measured, and those aspects where each district will get a score based on that, as will each school. So that'll come out later this year as they go through the DPI. As far as the school strategic profiles for each high school and what colleges see, information from this is made available to each college, but this isn't the profile we send to each college. Each college gets its own profile and a write-up from each high school that describes the program involved. It's a good topic to be shared at some point. Maybe I'll have Tor in to explain what goes out to the colleges and what are they looking for, where we go through, for example, people will question, well, you don't have class rankings. So how do they know who's first versus eighth? Well, the colleges, that doesn't matter to them as much as where are you falling in a class, how competitive is that class in terms of what courses are they taking. So that's a school profile that's written in a different manner. It's kind of a one-sheet primer on that school. Conard and Hall each have them, and both obviously are very highly thought of as competitive institutions.
So specifically, I'm a state elected official, and is this one of the kind of key sources of information for digesting, understanding who we are as a district in addition to conversations?
I think there's good information in this. I'll be honest with you. I wish it was more up to date, but I think as time goes on and these become more up to date, this is a good way for people to find out about the community they're moving into. There's questions in here that can lead you to, okay, what is the community value? We're all getting used to this being the new measurement system. There's information on this, I'll be honest with you, anytime somebody would come in for an interview. If you're interviewing for a principalship and you sit in front of me, I'll know within 30 seconds if you haven't read the school strategic profile. And if you haven't, shame on you. You're coming in to interview for that position. So those are the kind of things so there's a multitude of uses for it. Do politicians look at it? Sure, I think a lot of people do at the state level. This itself isn't necessarily the measurement for each school. This is kind of the government's public reporting on each district and each school, separate from the district performance index.
Okay, thanks. All right. Moving on to Mr. Vicinis. State assessment results.
It won't switch off.
Paul's here tonight. This is actually, I want to welcome Ann McKernan, who's here presenting tonight for the first time as Director of Secondary Education, as well as Carrie Jones, Director of Elementary Education. And they get to join Paul in his traveling roadshow of our assessment results. And this is something I think we're all a little bit more excited to present on than the SAT, in that now we have some growth data. This is something we've been talking about for a while. Once we have this data, now that time is here. So they're going to share not just the data, but also what we're doing and now how we're digging into it, how we're sharing it with teachers, principals, department supervisors, and what we're doing with this. So.
Thanks, Tom. And I just want to echo a welcoming to Ann. Welcome back to Carrie for our first collective report to you all on your 2016 state assessment results for grades 3 through 8. You all have a very detailed report in the board booklet and also available to the public at home on our website. And for this evening, we'll hit really just some of the highlights of that and take your questions. The order of our report will run through some aggregate data relative to how do we look overall across the 3 tested areas. Then we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive into literacy and mathematics as they're measured by our new Smarter Balanced assessments. We'll break down those scores in some depth relative to different student subgroups, ones that we've talked about, the new state definitions that are included in that performance profile report that Tom was just mentioning, as well as some others. And we'll get into science toward the end, which really has less of that detailed analysis since that test is not offered every single year consecutively, but only in grades 5, 8, and 10, and leave plenty of time for questions. First, just by way of public service announcement, I do want to share that the individual student score reports are being mailed home. They should be expected to be received or mailed or sent home through backpacks, depending on each of the schools, but they should be expected to be received in homes in the next 2 weeks, I would say. They're currently, with most of the schools, being stuffed into the appropriate envelopes and such by student. And again, as was the case last year, you have 2 kind of formats for these reports. You have those blue reports, which are our new math and literacy reports on 1 page. Performance is broken across 4 categories: above goal, at goal, approaching goal, and not yet at goal for the grade level. And for science, that more traditional black and white version, which breaks student performance into 5 categories, which the state has named advanced, goal, proficiency, basic, and below basic. Some awesome names that they've chosen for those 5 categories. So just want to let folks know to expect that, and there's detailed information there on student performance and for relative subscores as they're available on the tests. As a whole, our aggregate data for the district, we are pleased to report a couple of things. First, in terms of the overall strength of our scores, in both literacy and mathematics, our overall scores, when combining all grades together, place us in the top third of the state for both assessments. We did have what I'll call modest growth on our literacy, really just up kind of a blip, so really a point. So we're relatively flat with an equal performance from what we had last year. And we're up. I'm going to say comfortably in math, 3 points overall. And we posted we've been having some record scores in science for the last 3 years, and we're up a couple of points there. On the far right, you see the comparative data for Connecticut for this current year. And in the report, we talk about the fact that we continue to enjoy roughly 15 points, 14.7 points above the Connecticut average overall, a little bit down from last year where we posted 16.5 points. So that's something we're excited by our scores, but we're not as excited as we want to be. We really, it's kind of a mixed message in terms of I think we've done a very good job, a very solid job, but we're not giving ourselves an A+. And we'll talk about why as we go through each of the pieces. So starting with literacy, and literacy bears some explanation. So last year, just prior to the testing window, the governor announced another change, and said in the effort to reduce the amount of testing time, they were going to alter the exam. And that was done by removing the writing portion on grades 3 through 8 literacy assessments. So that performance task was taken out. Therefore, in order to be able to compare apples to apples, the state rescored unofficially, and I'll tell you what unofficially means, rescored last year's tests for English language arts and provided that information to districts so that we could know how did we grow. In general, what that translated to, the writing test generally for us as a district would have increased our overall literacy scores. That was an easier part of the test, relatively speaking, for our students. So if you're looking at the numbers that say 2015 and you compare them to what I put up here last year for 2015, the scores look like they went down. That's really the effect of the rescoring. And the reason I call it unofficial is because the state has no interest in reproducing new individual score reports, because that wouldn't make sense. The kids took the test with the writing test, they got their scores. With the writing test, those are their scores. This is really done for comparative measures so that we can see how we did. And overall, again, you see that we're up about a point overall. In mathematics, you see that we've had an overall gain of about 3.2% in comparison to last year. And it's interesting, and I skipped one of my notes from my cheat sheet here to kind of explain this a little bit more. There's two ways that you should really be looking at the data as you're looking across either table. One is just kind of across the board. So if I picked on 6th grade, for instance, I noticed that we moved from 51% to 57% in math. And so from a programmatic standpoint, we were very pleased with that. That was a big bump in 6th grade. We see some places where we might have been down a shade or kind of flat. But in terms of the students, I'm looking at the green columns, percentage of students who achieved 3 or higher. If I look at the student cohorts, 6th grade moving into 7th, they moved from 51% last year to 53% on the next year's test. So that's good news for student growth. They kind of started from a place where I would expected 51% of them at least to achieve mastery. 53% did, so that's a little bit of a gain. So if you kind of read that diagonally, I could point to other lines and highlight areas where we saw a dip or a flat. And that's really the way that as we analyze the scores, we start to look at them so that we can have a sense programmatically, are we doing any better? And then from the perspective of student performance. And that really sort of begs, some of our further analysis in terms of how do we then compare to both the state and more importantly to our DIRG. Now the state of Connecticut discourages comparisons to what they're now calling the district reference group, or they no longer call it the demographic reference group, because as we've said and we'll talk about tonight, our demographics really don't match that list of 20 other towns within DIRG B. But overall, generally speaking, our trends for performance have matched the DIRG while we've been slightly lower than the DIRG average. What we see as a notable concern this year certainly kind of jumps off that page in terms of our 8th grade math. Out of any, that's the one that really dips for us somewhat significantly. We have some other dips that we look at, 3rd grade math, I think it's 7th grade literacy, and we have some points in there. I think it's 6th grade literacy where we're really hitting almost equaling that DIRG average. So overall, this kind of helps to tell us the tale as to where does our effort need to be prioritized in terms of our close looks at what's that cohort data for our students and what's that programmatic measure. In terms of the concerns on DIRG comparisons, you've seen this slide before, which says in a moment we'll break down all of our scores across high needs. We'll break them down across the state-defined categories of race and ethnicity. We're also going to break them down across enrollment, number of years enrolled in the district. What's amazing is the incredibly high degree of correlation that's found between performance on state assessments and socioeconomic status. And using the available data set from a most recent census on socioeconomics as measured by participation in free and reduced lunch, you see that you have this very powerful correlation with an R-squared value of, I can't see it now, but I believe it's almost 0.70, demonstrating that as the percentage of students who participate in free and reduced lunch increase, your overall test average decreases. The red squares on the screen represent the DIRG B schools with West Hartford identified. And there's 3 important points that we want to make. First, we want to note our performance relative to our DIRG. We demonstrate overall that we're toward the bottom end of that performance circle overall in terms of the height, but we're not included within that circle, which is to say, if I look at the median trace of the percentages of students receiving free and reduced lunch in DIRG B, somewhere between 8 and 10%, and we look at West Hartford, slightly over 20%, we really look different in that regard. If I look more closely to percentages, districts that are over that 20% threshold, I've got 2 blue dots that I can see directly above us, which happen to correspond to Mansfield, who we've seen up there before, and for the first time this year, Portland. So overall, we feel that relative to this particular analysis, we want to continue to compare ourselves to DIRG B because they're the communities that others are looking at, but we want to do so with kind of this informed decision and understanding of our demographics versus the demographics of those towns. And what that, that's not just sort of to explain anything away, what we need to do about that. And so that's where we kind of get into a deeper dive of what the state has defined the high needs group. And as we've said before in other presentations, this is a new category that's been defined by the state where they take socioeconomically disadvantaged, which we were just talking about, students with disabilities and our English language learners, and they put them together, and the rationale for putting them together is so that smaller districts that have a very small size would still have visibility on this, would still report this statistic. So on the left-hand side, in the front in blue, you see how that group performed overall in 2015, and in the back in red, you see how that group performed overall in 2016. And within the body of the report, we make note of the significant gap that we see from the non-high needs group, from students not in this category. The good news story behind this is the idea that the majority of our high needs group demonstrated a fair amount of growth from this year to last year. Certainly we see that with economically disadvantaged. In the neighborhood, if you can read that, or you can reference the tables which give it more clearly in the report, 5 or more points of growth. It's our English language learners, and we'll talk about that in terms of significant growth that they made, as one would predict on the English language arts test, 6-point growth in 1 year, fairly significant. This is a logical sort of conclusion based on the idea that they've had 1 year additional in the country, 1 year additional in terms of English language instruction. It's our students with disabilities. We noticed we had the graphic makes it appear flat. It's actually in the neighborhood of a 0.5 point to a point of loss overall performance, which when you're looking at the numbers, it's concerning that it's in the negative, but the value is actually somewhat negligible relative to sample size. But it's of concern that we're not seeing the same amount of growth there, so that's something that we are concerned about. The state no longer reports, but in the accountability plan, but still does provide the metrics for how students perform across race and ethnicity. And we see some of the same trend in terms of growth. But one of the things, I tried to highlight this in order to be able to read the graph, to look at what was the measure of growth for any one group. And as we take a look at those measures, and that's tabulated for you in the printed report, what's exciting and interesting is if I compare the growth of any one group in these minority subgroups, as they're called, to the majority group, we see that the gap in achievement is actually closing. So on this graphic, it's broken down with ELA in the front in that kind of yellow, and with math in the back in the green. And you see on the left-hand side our high needs versus non-high needs students. In ELA, as we've kind of already said, our English language arts scores were kind of flat. Our non-high needs students had a very modest amount of growth from one year to the next, whereas our high needs students grew in the neighborhood of 2 points above their previous year's performance. So that translates into a 2-point closing of the achievement gap for that subgroup in literacy, and another 0.5 point or so in mathematics. Likewise, you see across Black, Hispanic, 2 or more races, in comparison to white students, the closing of the gap in those, and that's, again, you could crunch the numbers just as well from the table, but I thought the visual provided for a real sort of easy way to observe that. One of the more interesting statistics that we found when we took a little bit of a deeper dive had to do with a number of years in the district, which is something that also makes logical sense to us. We have a great confidence in the strength of our overall programming, and we see some very real differences in the performance of students who have been with us for 3 years or longer, 2 years or less. And so this graphic is just pulled from that report to quickly demonstrate that as that sort of plays itself out across the different grade levels. And it sparked some conversation with our instructional leadership about what we're doing in terms of our transition planning with students and in terms of our intervention programming to make sure we have our eyes on this. Lastly, moving away from English language arts and mathematics into science, we're very, very pleased. Again, we've posted some very strong numbers in our science overall. So we see in grade 5, I think it's in the neighborhood of our second strongest performance over a 8 or 9 year period. A solid performance in 8th grade after hitting a record high last year in our 8th grade performance. And in 10th grade on our CAPT test in science, we posted the highest percentage of students meeting mastery that we have ever seen in the district. We actually, in that grade level, exceeded the DERG average for that. By way of comparison, our science performance, aggregating all of 5th, 8th, and 10th grade together, comparing it to the DERG above in the darker blue line, West Hartford in the middle in that light blue, and the state average trailing beneath. We see that over the last 3 years, we've really closed the gap with our DERG, and we're posting extremely competitive scores in comparison to the rest of the state of Connecticut. So with that, I would share with the public, as Tom has mentioned, much of this data is freely available to the public on both the State Department of Education's website and the new site, EdSite, which is there, which replaces the old CT reports, which is now really the one-stop shop for board members, public, and interested others to get any of this data for any districts and for schools in Connecticut. So I'd like to open it up to questions.
Thanks, Paul. I'm going to just jump in right away just to make a couple of comments that I certainly made before. But first of all, thank you for this. I really appreciate and I've learned on my time on the board the value of this kind of data, and both in the aggregate and disaggregate, that it allows us to have these kinds of conversations over time about the successes, challenges of our schools, of our district, in really key and important areas of understanding and of testing and these kinds of things. So I appreciate that. And I see that also as one of 2 key consumers of this, the kind of optics of this, right? One, that is our teachers and our students and how we can use this information as one of many data points to kind of think about making improvements over time. Cool. My frustration, and as you know, is this language. It's first of all, it's our conversation, that this is a conversation with the state, right? And we're always bristling against the fact that we have to have these conversations with the state, and there's value to this, I understand that. But I feel like we could also have conversations all based on our own terms, right? Instead of having these comparative analyses with our DERG B and having these graphs, which are interesting and certainly tell a lot about the story of who we are, have a kind of a narrative and an optic that isn't comparing us to the Derg B, but to the other ones in that vertical column who have the 20% re-induced lunch. In other words, to just tell the narrative like we want to tell the narrative as opposed to constantly reacting, or in addition to, we can't obviously get away from that. And this model that is presented by this language of ELL and high-risk needs, these are these deficit models of, and you guys know this better than I do, of these populations that drives me crazy, right? ELL, English language learner, like they don't speak a language, they have to learn English. No, these, like my colleague says at UConn, these are emergent bilinguals. Let's just give value to the knowledge and the cultural capital that these populations have. High need students groups. Again, I get it, and it depends on the district and the group that we're talking about. But I guess I'd urge you to kind of think outside of the box here, and because I think the consumer of this is also us as a district and families who come here. If we could see, is we want to highlight the fact that we have a strength because of that. These instead of high needs, in other words, kind of flipping the narrative and showing that visually alongside this other kind of data that we I know it's more work, I get that, but I think it also speaks to the fact that that's how we want to present ourselves as a district. So to kind of go against achievement gaps, talk more about opportunity gaps and these kinds of things. So that's a request for a kind of different kind of script. I'll start with that.
Paul, thanks. I want to echo this data is really invaluable. It goes year after year. We can track it. In fact, it really does paint a picture for us as a district on how we're really doing. In fact, so much so that I think the comparison of the West Hartford Derg B averages on page 13, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, is that 8th grade math, we saw that drop off there in that comparison. If we go back 2 years, I think it's that same 6th grade math that dropped, and we looked at it and talked about it in the same time. So there's actually some history here of that particular cohort. And I think go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have that. I apologize. I don't have that statistic right at my fingertips, but that's part of when we are looking at that. Those gaps persist, and the question is, are they widening or decreasing? So the good news story that was tempting to highlight and maybe didn't come through strongly enough is that closing of the gap that we are observing on some of our other groups. In terms of what's happening in that 8th grade, certainly there's a cohort gap that we're still observing. Our question and what we're digging into currently is making sure that gap's not widening, which can be the case in mathematics because it's more of a cumulative curriculum. But you're absolutely right in terms of historically we saw a big gap in the previous middle school year, which is kind of playing itself out.
So using these numbers and instead of putting them on a chart and identifying them, we can actually, and I know as a district we would do this, but this is actually where you can actually make the difference, because now you see this moving through your chart, this dip, if you will, and it moves year after year. Now this is, is it widening? Is it the same? And that's a great comparison, but what can we do to close it, right? That's the key. That's where this information is key to that classroom. And how do we take this particular 8th grade math and close that gap and year after year? And what do we have to do to intervene to make that so that, maybe next year or 2 years from now we don't see it with such a disparity?
Absolutely. And I'll just, and I'll afford Ann and Carrie both an opportunity to kind of weigh in so that you have a picture of some of the things that we're doing. I'll just introduce it with, as a team, the three of us have been going out to each of the schools, and we're meeting with each principal, and at the secondary levels, they're both their department supervisors, and we're looking at individual school-based data, what those areas of strength were, and what those areas of need were, and we're talking about how we deploy resources. So I'll ask each of them just maybe give just a minute on what that looks like at each of their levels.
Thank you, Paul.
I've had a great opportunity to go out and meet with the principals and their leadership teams to review their individual school data at different grade levels and get some ideas of what they think could be opportunities for improvement. Also identify some models of excellence because they certainly have some strength in their schools as well, and we want to make sure we understand the strength as well as what our next work is. They've been very thoughtful meetings. I've actually had a series of two. First, we presented some information, asked them to think about it, and come back with some initial thoughts and plans of how to address that. And so we've had some follow-up meetings this week, and they'll be formalizing some plans. We're going to give them some time to think about some of the changes they'd like to make. And this was a great opportunity. They haven't seen growth data in years, so it was really they were very happy to see what their efforts. We've put in a lot of resources, a lot of thought. This is the first time we have some growth in many years. And so we will be formalizing some plans by the end of this month. And I look forward to working with them as a collective and with their teachers to continue to shrink these gaps and move ahead.
And I'll affirm what Ann said at the elementary level. A little tougher to get out to 11 schools with Paul, but I've been able to join many of those meetings, or if not, have my townwide curriculum specialist teams meet with other building-based leadership teams to plan as well. And at elementary, we're really looking at trends of professional learning need. So the data, as you alluded to, Mark, tells us a story, and we need to look at that. We need to look at our professional learning needs. At the elementary level, we're thrilled to have a math instructional coach for our Title I schools and one for our non-Title I schools this year. In addition, we repositioned one of the coaching roles to be math-focused, which was a decision we anticipated we might need, and so we have Courtney Warner, who's a new hire, previously experienced math coach, working with schools, targeted schools to begin with, really on, in essence, intervention cycles with teams of teachers. So going into the classroom, modeling lessons, looking at individual student needs, but really looking at the global trends in concepts and procedures, in math, communicating math reasoning. So taking that school-wide data and then turnkeying it into job-embedded professional learning for teachers, as well as using our Wednesday CSI time. So one of our townwide folks went out to a school this past Wednesday, did a joint session with the principal, with the curriculum specialist, together with the staff, based on their individual building needs. So it's doing right around professional learning and differentiating based on school and team needs.
So I'll just,
If I could jump in with this, because there's a micro level and the macro level with the state data, and then one of the things I've been speaking about with principals is that followers come forward with problems and leaders come forward with solutions. So what are the solutions? But before we get to solutions, because it's so simplistic to say, well, I'm going to solve this problem, do we know what questions we're asking? And really working with our leadership in how to manipulate data, which you've got 3 experts here, and that's really what they're doing, talking about going out there, because what question hasn't been asked about that 8th grade cohort at this school in that class? What else? What's the absence rate? There's so many questions that maybe, what's the teacher absence rate? There's so many things that you look at in terms of, okay, what are these things and what is this telling us? And so we have to look at what some of our solutions in the past have been. For example, one solution, and we don't have the answer to this yet. I'm throwing it out there to give you an idea of what we're looking at, like double math. Is it working? Is that the appropriate intervention for students? Which you talk to 10 people, I think you'll get 5 going each way. Those are the kind of things that I'm excited to be looking at the data in new and fresh ways. And also, as Ann mentioned, finding the successes. Okay, so these people aren't succeeding, but they are in this classroom. So why is that, and what does it look like here? And really getting to the point of really diving into what are the ways we can work. The macro level, the point I'll make, reading specialists is a state certification. There's no such thing as a math specialist. We invented it. Look at the state scores in math and the state scores in reading. Why is that? There is this assumption in the value of reading versus math that I think we as citizens have to look at in different ways. So.
Hey, thanks everybody. Paul, on the last page, you talk about participation. and the percentages look great, 99.3% participation rate for literacy, and a 99.1 participation rate for mathematics. I'm curious about the actual numbers of students. Is the raw number of students who aren't participating, is that a concern? And if they don't participate, what do the students do during this testing time?
It's a great question. I'm always concerned about the raw number. I try to chase it down to the individual student, and I really encourage where there are concerns with parents, if they're making a decision to not participate in our state testing program, that they're making an informed decision. We always let parents know that that's ultimately their right. But if our participation rate were to, and we're not in danger of this, so I'm not concerned about the outcome, but if our participation rate were to fall below a certain percent, I don't want to. We would be, in terms of our district rating and things like that, it would have a heavy impact. It could theoretically have an impact on state funding relative to grants and things, but that's a big stick in terms of a threat that the state holds. I don't know. I think we would need years of performance of not meeting that, and we haven't had that issue. You've seen that issue in the news. You've seen that. Potentially in certain other states with the PARCC assessment system versus Smarter Balanced, and a lot of that had to do with not meeting their deadlines when they changed their state assessment systems. So overall, I'm always wanting to make sure that we have those conversations with parents. But the other numbers that go into not participating have to do with students who are maybe medically fragile or away from school, and despite our best efforts to accommodate testing needs, maybe we can't get to them. At times it can be move-ins because the state window for testing is fairly broad, and you could move in from out of state with 2 days left to the testing window, and our expectation from the state of Connecticut is that you would test that child. Overall, it's a great news story. We're at 99-point-something%. We have a great number, so I think we're in good shape.
Thank you. That's good to hear.
So Paul and team, I have more of a comment probably than a question. So one of the comments is, I know we talk a lot about the students who receive free or reduced lunch. What about those students who are on the cusp? So they don't qualify for the free and reduced lunch because maybe they just missed the cutoff. So are we looking at opportunities for those students and their families? So I'm very concerned about those families who need the assistance, but for some reason they're not able to take advantage of it. And I hear you. I understand that you're going to be going around, you're meeting with principals and, the other administrative staff. And I'm hoping that you've given consideration to also bring families in. I know when we were going out last year, there were a number of families that talked about math especially. They don't understand it. Now, we all know sitting around here that students request assistance from their parents, whether it's English, the language, arts, science. But when it comes to math, parents are like, help, I don't understand. And so we all know how frustrating it is for a parent as well as a student who doesn't understand. And then when the testing comes around, they're just as, baffled. So I'm hoping, that we begin to look at those particular areas and offer some assistance and guidance. But not only that, make sure that it's publicized in a way that families can take advantage of it.
Absolutely. I'll just make a quick comment, and I'll let Carrie talk about family outreach relative to math specifically, and some things that went on last year and some things we're planning for this year. To your first point about students that are just outside that, free and reduced lunch participation, it's a very good point. It comes down to the relationships with the teacher and the principals at the school in terms of knowing those kids, knowing their individual stories. And I can tell you from my conversations with principals and my conversations with teachers, they know their kids. They work hard to help them. There's no, for parents at home, there's no symbol in Power School or anywhere else where we're capturing anybody's yearly gross income or anything like that. That's not information that's shared or available. So it's obviously nothing you'd ever see in a report here. It's
And
nothing that I know.
Nor is free and reduced lunch. There's
Correct.
no identification of free and reduced lunch for students, so teachers wouldn't know that.
And it's not, as we talk about it, to Mark's earlier point, it's not something that we hide behind or ever, I think to the earlier comment about graduation rate for special education, it's not anything that we ever set a lower bar for. It's something that we report on to highlight. We're aware that as a district, we need to provide that outreach. We need to provide that programming so that we can make equitable opportunities for all of our kids. And how will we know when we're doing enough? When our achievement shows no differences across any of these demographics or measures. So absolutely, I think that speaks to part of our district goals, which has family outreach as a key element under Goal 2. It'll be a part that we will be encouraging you continue to support as a board goal in January when we do our workshops. But I'll let Carrie talk more specifically about some efforts that we did last year and that are planned for this year.
I know I'm struggling with pre-calculus this year, supporting that at home, so I hear you, Carol. It's really critical, particularly with mathematics, I think, to make sure that parents know, and it's an important reminder, so appreciate hearing that. We have done a few things in the past year and plan to continue and enhance this year. We've met with many PTOs, so Mary Listini, my townwide math curriculum specialist, along with some of our coaches and building-based folks, have done many family math night kinds of things, whether a PTO presentation or a more formal math night, kind of like people often do a literacy night. Many schools have started to adopt a math night as well. And Allie Foley at Smith is another math specialist in the district who's helped us with that. So we actually have a math team, really the first time this year, full team to really think about strategizing, okay, here's something we can bring to families. How do we modify it based on the community's needs, based on the school's needs, based on what the data's telling us? So PTOs have been a wonderful connecting point, but not everyone can head to a PTO meeting. I myself could not often as an administrator in my own school that I was working in versus my children's school. So we have a math website we've started at the elementary level, but I think certainly it's a reminder to enhance it. We also do have federal Title I funds available to specifically target family involvement. So our Title V, Title I schools have additional funds to support where we'd see, and those Title I funds are based on income levels. So we have additional funding to support, and schools are taking advantage of that funding, and we're making sure to promote its use.
So is that on the point about additional funding? Is that new funding?
No,
That's been around for a while.
We've had it. It's typically been focused more on literacy.
Yeah.
So many schools are shifting or adding to a literacy night with math work as well. So we've always had we're required by the federal statute with the grant, Title I grant, to have a certain percentage targeted for parent involvement.
And new funding we got this last year through the immigrant grant. We had the state tracks the number of students that have an immigrant status that are enrolled in our schools, and if you reach a certain threshold, you qualify for a grant. So we do have that grant, and we've put that into place as a family outreach coordinator at some of our elementaries to support that work in addition to our Title I. So that person was just recently hired and is just starting some work at targeted elementaries.
And finally, on October 17th, we have a parent-teacher council meeting, and we will seek to get feedback that's a parent-teacher leadership group from every PTO across town. So we have a math presentation with them, but we'll also seek their feedback on math-specific needs as families.
So on the free and reduced for lunch, as Carol talked about, on the fringes, if you will, is the income level hard and fast and written in stone? And if it is, then yes, all right, I get it. But if it's not, is there any leeway in there if X family makes Y, but, this other family makes Y plus a little more, but, there may be a hard and fast rule where $100 or $1,500 over an income?
It's hard and fast. It's $31,000 for a family of 4.
Okay, so it's hard and fast. So there's no leeway if it's $31,750. There's no, yeah.
31,000 isn't the exact number, but that's the,
So whatever that number is, so there's really there's no leeway.
there's
outside of
gradations to free lunch and then reduced lunch
Reduced.
within it, but besides that.
that. Okay, thanks.
In the spirit of Carol, I have more of a comment than a question. The first is just when you showed the comparison of West Hartford and the Derby, and they sort of follow each other, I just want to point out, I understand that we're a little bit lower in things, but the fact that we parallel them means that it's not our curriculum per se that's problematic in certain places, right? If everybody's dropping in, say, math in 8th grade or whatever it is, we may be dropping more or less, but it's not like it's just a West Hartford problem. So I just wanted to observe that. And the second thing I just wanted to say, you said that these reports are available in general, but knowing myself, if I weren't on the board, I might not read them. So I just want to say for those people who aren't going to read them that usually when you give these reports, I say things like, but yes, what are you doing about this? And I just want to say that in one paragraph, for example, you're breaking down the 8th grade math. You're saying, well, we did better, but interestingly, there was a fall off in the communicating reasoning section, but the problem solving was an area of, and I just want to say that in this report, you deal with not just the gross numbers, but you go into the details. So you say, well, okay, so this specific thing was the issue. So how do we deal with that specific thing in a curricular way? And I was so impressed that, again, for people who aren't going to read this, they should know that this is not just a sort of global, oh, what shall we do? But I was so impressed at how deeply you went into things to target specific issues for compensating. So I just wanted to commend you for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
If I could add
Please.
one plug, what Cheryl's mentioning there, there's a significant element of looking at recency bias and how does that affect things, and does that mean before an assessment you're going to review things to increase the score in that area? That's really that kind of push-pull, because we've always said we'll be informed but not driven by test scores. That being said, with our PSAT, NMSQT, and SATs coming up, and free access to Khan Academy for students, anybody that's watching and any parents that don't take part in free review that gives you something that you mastered 2 years ago, you just haven't looked at it. Don't go in and take the test cold. You don't have to pay for a Kaplan SAT prep course. It's all available free. Both of our high schools have it there, and students can look individually about what they've done, take practice tests, and that hopefully will help move away from recency bias, not in a state assessment, but in something that people will be sending to colleges, perhaps.
And can we please, to jump on that, how can we get that word out to the students? I just was speaking to someone who is paying money to continue to send their child for prep, and I said, it's on Khan Academy. I mean, it's something that's accessible to everyone. Is the word really getting out to the students in the schools to be sure that they're aware of that and take advantage of that as well?
I actually, last Monday, Mr. Duarte and I were at a meeting in Boston with the College Board. West Hartford, Conner and Hall have the highest registration rate on Khan Academy of any schools in the state. So we're doing a better job here than anywhere else. One of the problems is there is still a belief in people that you get what you pay for. And I try to tell them this, but I mean, there is that if I spend $1,000, I'm going to get more of it. And maybe there's a element of, well, if you spend money, you're going to invest your time in it more. I don't know. Each person has to make their own decision, but I don't know. Paul, do you have anything to add?
I think you said it well. I think the word is out there pretty well, and those statistics, it's bordering on 80% registration. I think people will sometimes default to, if I can have someone side by side that's looking over my shoulder and telling me, versus I'm going on and doing it. But there is a lot to be gained as a student from really leveraging that resource to understand what are the types of questions that are there. I mean, in terms of just familiarizing yourself so that you can go in and be comfortable, know what the questions look like, know exactly the format of the test and all the rest. and then leverage that Khan Academy to get help if you don't have a person next to you, or be able to do that practice on your own terms, in your own time, at your own setting. It's an outstanding resource. So I don't know if I'm saying anything more than Tom did.
Can I
but-
just ask, Sarah, if that's your sense in the thick of it?
Well, so last year, so my junior year, I took pre-calculus, and we didn't discuss it only came up once, and it was just our teacher quickly saying, oh, I have to make sure you guys link your accounts before the end of the week, so we're just going to do it now on a short Wednesday. And I personally don't think that it's well encouraged by the schools necessarily. I think teachers specifically, it might come up in one of the junior planning series, but it's not really influence. And it's also, I think it's important to make parents more aware too, because the parents are the ones that are ultimately paying for the $1,000 SAT prep courses. And I mean, I'm victim of it. I have an SAT tutor, but I don't know. It's just.
Have you been on it to look at it?
Honestly, I've been on once, mainly because, I mean, personally, I don't like studying on a computer. I like using a book, and I like being able to just flip and check my answers, and I don't like staring at a screen for a long period of time. But I don't know. That's just me. But I'm sure it's a great resource for kids that having such an expensive course is not practical for them. But that's not how I've studied.
All right. More on this. Yeah, go ahead.
Just
Tim.
one other thing to jump in, though, when continuing to spread that word, also I think families need to be aware that there is technology they can check out if necessary. If they don't have that, we're really trying to make sure everyone has access.
Let me just jump in, because I want to say my girls were at Conard, and I want to say Mr. Duarte and the guidance department has done a fantastic job in promoting Khan Academy. My girls was on Khan Academy this summer, and as a parent, I kept promoting it. Go on Khan Academy. Have you been on Khan Academy today? To use the resources that this district has available, for each and every one of us, parents included. So sometimes the parents also have to do their part to remind the students that these resources are available and to take advantage of them.
All right. Well, thanks to the three of you, and Anne, welcome. Thank you. Thanks for your work. Welcome all of you, but particularly Anne. All right. Moving on. Our good fortune to welcome back to the table Mr. Rick Ledwith.
Good evening. The personnel report can be found on page 21, and in accordance with district policy, reflects the changes in certified staff that's occurred over the first month of the school year. And as you can see, it's been a pretty light month in terms of changes that have occurred. We also wanted to give the board an update on our Wolcott Elementary principal search, which is ongoing. We've been recruiting through the month of September, and the position closed on Friday, and we had 49 applicants for this critical leadership role. So we were happy with the response to this position. We've been working with the parent and teacher community over the last few weeks in developing a leadership profile, which helps us to identify the leadership characteristics, traits, and experiences that'll be important for the community to see in its next principal. We had a response. We had about 80 people fill out an online survey, and we also met over the course of 2 days. We met with 35 individuals to further develop that leadership profile. In terms of the interview process, we'll be interviewing over the next three weeks. And the first interview committee will be comprised of teachers and parents who will screen the candidates that were more closely matched to the leadership profile. And that committee hopefully will identify anywhere from 2 to 4 people to move forward in the process. The next stage of the process will involve a performance task at Wolcott Elementary School. So we'll have the number of candidates that are identified go to Wolcott. They're going to meet with large groups of teachers and parents over during an evening, sometime over the next week or so. And hopefully that committee will identify, well, hopefully at least 2 people that will move forward to meet with the executive team. And the executive team would meet with those 2 to 3 folks sometime over the next couple of weeks. And at that point, we'd hopefully identify 1 finalist to move forward to a final interview with the superintendent. Assuming everything goes as scheduled, which we're hopeful it will, we should be before the board with an announcement at the November 1st board meeting, which is a little less than 4 weeks from now. So assuming everything goes smoothly through the next 3 weeks, and that the background checks all go well, we should have an announcement at that meeting if everything goes smoothly. So, questions?
Yeah, Rick, first, I just want to thank you and Tom. I've very good friends with the co-president and the treasurer of the Wolcott PTO, and they both said that everyone has been phenomenal as far as this process is going. So thank you for that. But I just wanted to reaffirm what I heard, and I just want to make sure that we're clear on this, is that this is not the most optimal time of year to be searching for a new principal.
True.
So that said, what I really hope we don't do is try and force a situation where, you know, you can never ever guess a perfect fit, but I'd really be concerned if we went with a really less than perfect fit, because I know that the interim principal is only there through, I believe, December.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in the event that this pool didn't yield the proper applicant, would there be an extension of this interim principal going forward, or would there be another interim principal put in and then we just start anew with the search? What would be the process for that?
Yeah, so I mean, you bring a great point, Jay, and Tom and I met with the PTO a couple of weeks ago, and that same question came up, and we let them know, although the timing isn't ideal, usually we do these types of searches in the spring, if we don't get the perfect fit, and it has to be the right fit, and each committee is going to help us with that decision. So that first round of interviews that takes place with that initial committee, I'm not going to go into the room and kind of force a candidate on that committee. If they don't feel that that person that they feel could potentially lead Wolcott into the future is in that pool, then we'll stop right there. If they identify a couple of people to move forward and we bring them forward to the performance task, and at that level, that committee doesn't feel that we have the right person, then we may again stop it at that point. Or it could get all the way to the executive team and to the superintendent. And if at that point we couple of good people made it all the way through, but we don't feel we have that right person, then we will stop and we will do the process in the spring. So we have a couple of different retired principals that we've been calling upon over the last year or so. So we have a bench. The current interim principal would probably step down in December, and we'd have someone else who'd fill in behind her to finish up the school year, and then we'd start again in March, and hopefully get the right person at that point, if it didn't happen right now. But I have to say, we were encouraged with the quality of this pool. There were a lot of really interested principals from around the state. We're having one person come in from outside of New England to interview, so we're encouraged. But again, has to be the right match, so it's a great point.
Is the performance task a new feature in the interview process?
Yeah, we added that last year over at Bugby, and what we do is we have a room set up with about 20 teachers, and we have another room set up with about 20 parents, and the candidates will come in, for example, we'll have one person in the teacher room, one person in the parent room, and they're presenting as if it's the first PTO meeting or the first staff meeting. And then they have about 15 minutes to make a presentation. Teachers have about 15, 20 minutes to ask questions, and then the candidates will switch rooms. So they literally have to make 2 separate presentations to a group of parents, to a group of teachers, and then we'll bring the other candidate, however many candidates are coming through that process, we'll have them run through that same performance task. It went really well. We were excited with how it worked out last year, so we're doing it again at Wolcott. So.
We did the same thing with the athletic director with separate groups of interviews, one group of teachers and coaches, another group of students and parents. So you had both aspects coming through. We're trying to adapt what we're doing in human resources to the changing times. Actually, I'm glad you brought up that PTO meeting because Rick and I did go over, and it was really a fascinating discussion. There was a lot of people there, a lot of engagement in it, and one parent asked, well, can you guarantee that the next principal will be here 10 years? And I said, no, I assume they won't. It's, just talking about the changing world in terms of length of stays at certain positions. And principals, some that oftentimes, if you get somebody great, somebody's tapping them on the shoulder sooner rather than later. That's what happens, so.
Thanks, Rick.
Sure.
Moving on to routine matters. I have a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
September 20th, 2016. Questions, comments, edits?
It's very, very minor, but I'm not sure how Mr. Zdanowitz was tagged as having seconded the motion to review the financial report. That's always the responsibility of the other financial examiner. So it's not absolutely critical, but just to be correct for the record.
Fair enough. Any other changes besides Mr. Sargent's? All those in favor of approving the minutes with Mr. Sargent's duly noted amendment of the September 20, 2016 meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Abstentions? We have one abstention here from Ms. Exum. So moved. Approved. Moving on. Information and reports from the board. Any reports? You want to talk about our Conard visit?
Last week, myself and Dr. Overmeyer Velasquez went to Conard for lunch, actually with Tyler, and it was good actually. It was pleasantly surprisingly good. We had the lunch, no, the discussion and everything. Everything went very, very well. I really anticipated, and I kind of had not expected a great meal, and I got one. We had chicken fajitas with brown rice, edamame, and a juice drink. And it was really pleasant. It was good. So I know these kids that was one particular meal, but it was a great meal, great conversation. Good to see the kids in class and in motion, if you will. You never really get to see that on this side of the table. So it was good. It was very, very well done. Very well. The place was spotless. The kids were incredibly quiet in the cafeteria. I don't remember that when I went to high school. So it was good. It was nice.
I'll just add, yeah, Taylor and Julia were great hosts. I think the disconnect for me, the food was really good. It was whole wheat this, and there was plenty of salt. There was a tomato soup that was fine. But it was all whole wheat and edamame and these kinds of things that I think might be a challenge to some students with a more sophisticated or less sophisticated palate, depending on how
probably
you
a
look
less
at it.
sophisticated palate. I don't know.
I don't know.
It was.
But Mark and I have very different, food needs, and so I think we kind of balanced. We had a kind of spectrum response here, right? So that was good too. Anyway, and the people who are working in the cafeteria did a great work. In addition, we also learned that the people who clean up between the multiple waves and shifts, the people, the custodial workers, are doing an amazing job of keeping that place moving and clean. So a shout out to them as well. Anyway, we haven't gone to Hall yet, but I suspect it's a similar. Yeah, when do I get Hall? Yeah.
To test the new Voda water at Hall. Yeah, it's a new dispensing water system at Hall. I don't want to steal any thunder if you want to talk about it, Sarah. Oh, so it's a system of flavored water with electrolytes. You can add seltzer, if you will, and you can add vitamins as well too. And it's I think $7.99 a month for 32 16-ounce containers. So it just adds another beverage option. I actually got to sample it. It was excellent, and I know my daughter will probably at least trying it to see if it'll fit into her movements around Hall, because it's only in one spot. But and I'm assuming, for me, I looked at it as a revenue spot for the food service. If we lost a lot tremendous revenue with bottled water, but this is another revenue source. So
If I may, in the absence of the Conard representative, I read in the newsletter we're getting the same system at Conard as well, so that's a great equity balance there. I wonder if it might come down to the middle schools as well. I don't know. I'm baby steps.
Be in the Christmas guard.
Sarah, over to you.
Okay, wow. So the marching band had a great time at the Park Road Parade despite the lovely, less than lovely weather. The fall sports are doing excellent at Hall. So next Saturday, the 15th, the Student Association, so that's our student government, is hosting Fall Fest, which is our community event of the fall. It's $3 for Hall students and $5 for community members. And there's going to be food and games and a dunk tank. Mr. Zatoon's hopefully going in. And so that's going to be fun. Everyone is, of course, welcome. And so then at the end of the month, we have the PSATs for freshmen, sophomores, and juniors if they register. And seniors, we get a college workshop. And the week before in November is our annual Madrigal Feast. So choir is getting all ready for that. So it should be fun. Buy your tickets. You can see me as the jester.
Mentioned the Park Road Parade. Carol and I marched in there as a representative from the Board of Ed, and it was pretty well attended considering the overcast and the mist, but another great event. And I have to say, because Conard wasn't there, that Hall marching band was probably the most impressive of all the marchers that came through. I thought they did an outstanding job. It was really cool to see.
Well, thanks to the two of you for representing. Any other reports, comments? No? Future business, we have some meetings coming up, October 18, November 1, and November 15, right back here, same time. Any requests for future agenda items? No? Any comments from visitors? No comments. We do have executive session tonight. We will be moving into executive session. I'll call that into sec. So just so you know, we will be leaving, and then we will be coming back. You're welcome to stay, or you're welcome to leave. Those of you who are watching or here here live. Anyway, all those. And I may have a motion to move to executive session to discuss legal matters.
So moved.
Second. We are now in executive session. The time is 8:22.